Forgive me, my voice is a little hoarse. I'm still kind of recovering from a flu bug from a couple of weeks ago. My voice still hasn't come all the way back, but I'm still going to try to deliver for you. So I'm a recovery advocate from San Francisco, and I came here today to talk to you about what's happening on the West Coast, since a lot of the time out here on the East Coast and in the media, it doesn't get reported about what's going on out there. And just so you all know, like, San Francisco is really ground zero for the fentanyl crisis. It's ground zero for the overdose crisis. It's ground zero for permissive and even radicalized harm reduction drug policy. And I'm here to tell you, as someone who was formerly homeless, that's my mugshot from 2018, on the streets of the Tenderloin in San Francisco, addicted to heroin and fentanyl, who's now been in recovery for over 6 years. We are turning the page, and I mean it, and I'll show you why. But before I do that, there's just a few people I want to thank. I want to thank Kevin Speck and Luke Neferatos. Without them and their support, I don't think I wouldn't be here talking to you today, but they also kind of help lift my advocacy up. And if you follow me on Twitter, or if you know I'm on Twitter, I have a pretty big following there on social media, T-Full Recovery, about 30,000 followers, and I built kind of a national platform, and I've talked across the United States and in Canada to different various groups about the drug crisis and the fentanyl crisis. And I can spend 15 minutes telling you about how bad things are and how many people are dying, and we know all that. So instead, I'm going to come at you with a message of hope about how we turn the page in San Francisco and on the West Coast. So, why did we take action on the West Coast? Well, if Dr. Wiener's still here, he was showing all those crazy ads about marijuana. Well, Dr. Wiener, hold my beer, because that right there, the No Overdose ad, which was sponsored by the National Harm Reduction Coalition and the San Francisco Department of Public Health, in 2020, they spent over $2 million to put this ad campaign on billboards all over San Francisco. Okay? Basically normalizing fentanyl use, exploiting homeless people. Okay? And I was one of those people, and I know 3 of the people in that image, because I used to use with them on the street. 2 of them are now dead from drug overdose, and 1 of them is in prison for attempted murder. Our public health department spent $2 million on that. That should enrage you. It enraged me, and it really motivated me to take action. So first of all, a coalition of us got together and we got those signs and billboards taken down. And we finally got the Department of Public Health to admit that they missed the mark on that. And the National Harm Reduction Coalition went away from San Francisco. Do we still have radicalized harm reduction? Yeah, we do. But now there's a recovery coalition that's standing up to them, saying, no, we want pragmatic solutions to our drug crisis, to our overdose crisis, to our homeless crisis. And it starts with recovery, with giving recovery a chance. We built an entire movement. We established the San Francisco Recovery Coalition. It's made up of, first of all, in San Francisco, you may not know this, but there's a huge recovery community in San Francisco. Maybe it's because of its history with drugs, but there's a huge recovery community. We're talking thousands and thousands of people in recovery. And we all know each other. And we managed to pull together a bunch of them. Many people from the Black community, they're actually leading our recovery coalition to come forward and say enough is enough with the permissive harm reduction policies. Did you know that in San Francisco last year we passed out 700,000 needles to drug users on the street? We passed out 250,000 crack and meth pipes on the street. We handed out over 100,000 yards of aluminum foil on our street. And we handed out 25,000 to 50,000 paper straws for people people to smoke fentanyl on our street. Now, I support needle exchange because it reduces blood-borne diseases like HIV and hepatitis C. But there's not 700,000 drug users in San Francisco, and they only picked up 30% of the needles, so guess where the rest went? They actually floated in the bay. Okay, so we have a biohazard issue in San Francisco as a result, right? So this is what I talk about being overly permissive or even radicalized. Harm reduction is a set of tools. It doesn't necessarily make for good policy. Now, some of the good things that we did in conjunction with the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions and my nonprofit, the Pacific Alliance for Prevention and Recovery, which is a subsidiary of FDPS, we sponsored a recovery summit in San Francisco. And we had Kevin come out and be our keynote speaker. So thank you, Kevin, for coming out and doing that. We had over 500 people attend, including the mayor at the time, Lemon Breed, and our current mayor, Daniel Lurie, both in attendance. And that was the real beginning of this movement over the past year, where we really pivoted away from some of the more harmful policies that have been in place and have taken a more pragmatic approach to focusing on recovery, to recognizing that accountability is one of the cornerstones of recovery, and actually working to address our overdose crisis in a meaningful way that puts a focus on funding and expanding drug treatment instead of drug use. We also sponsored the 4th Annual Recovery Day in San Francisco, which is also primarily a Black-led event. But my nonprofit, FDPS, stepped up and sponsored it this year in conjunction with other community partners. It's an event where we bring about 500 people together in Bodecker Park, which is in the heart of the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And if you've been to San Francisco, you may not. Bodecker Park in the 1990s was the epicenter of the crack epidemic. If you went there in 1995, there would have been 500 to 1,000 people smoking crack in that park, and it's now been transformed into a park where it's safe, there's no drugs allowed, people playing basketball, kids going there, and we host an annual recovery day where we just bring everyone from the recovery community together in the heart of the Tenderloin, which is the heart of the drug crisis in San Francisco, and we celebrate recovery as a solution to our crisis out there on the street. We've done other things. We're building bridges and partnerships in the community and across the country. So last year I was appointed as the co-chair of the Homeless Committee for the Bay Area Council. The Bay Area Council is a powerful lobbying group in San Francisco that advocates for the Bay Area, around transportation, housing, homelessness, the environment, etc. And they have a very strong lobby locally and nationally, and that's brought me to the halls of Washington, D.C., and last year brought me to the White House to meet with presidential advisors about homelessness and the fentanyl crisis in San Francisco, and what we can do to actually change the narrative and change the direction and try to save, really, the jewel of the Pacific. I know a lot of people in the media, San Francisco is taking a huge beating right now, and a lot of it's well-deserved. San Francisco, it's a lost city and all this stuff, and you've heard a lot worse things about it. And a lot of it's true, but at the same time, it's still one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And it's part of our country, it's part of the United States, and it shouldn't be ignored, and it shouldn't be given up for dead. And there are people there fighting the good fight to try to turn it around. As a member of the Bay Area Council, I pitched the idea of an assembly bill, the Recovery Housing Assembly Bill for the state of California. Currently in the state of California, it is not allowable by law to have drug-free recovery housing be funded by the state. In order to have permanent supportive housing be funded in the state of California because of a law called Senate Bill 1380 passed in 2016, you must have harm reduction language be included in your overall policy around your housing that recognizes drug use as part of the individual's journey, which means drug use is allowed. Well, I'll just give you some basic data on that. Last year, in 2024, 30% of all overdose deaths in San Francisco, we had 811 overdose deaths 30% of them happen in permanent supportive housing. Okay? Permanent supportive housing. 70% of those overdoses, total overdoses in San Francisco, happen at a fixed address. So not even the majority of the people are dying on the street that are dying of overdose, they're actually dying inside housing. So we have a real problem there, and we have an obligation to actually go into that housing and change the narrative, the rules, the funding around that so that we can promote recovery inside those facilities, and also create drug-free recovery spaces and housing for those that want to live in that environment. If you're a homeless single mom with kids, do you want your kids living in a 60-room hotel where 59 of the other people in the hotel are using drugs? Do you want your kids growing up in that environment? So this just isn't for people in recovery or whatever. It's for people experiencing homelessness or that need a leg up and don't want to grow up in a drug-laden environment where fentanyl is running rampant and meth is running rampant, because that's what's happening right now. That bill got passed the state assembly last year, 72-0 in California, but got killed in Senate appropriations. So we're bringing it back this year as Assembly Bill 255. We're trying again. And my nonprofit, Pacific Line for Prevention and Recovery, in conjunction with FDPS, supports it. And it also brings the state of California into compliance with federal regulations. In 2022, the Consolidated Appropriations Act was passed and signed by President Biden, which issued best practices for recovery housing to follow up on 2015 policy brief by HUD that recognized that recovery housing was part of Housing First. Yet the state of California will not allow it. And you have to ask why at that point. Well, it's because of that I don't want to say the word radical, but it's difficult to say that, so I'll just say because of that permissive harm reduction that's embedded in people's ideology around drug use. Where it's like, the previous individual who was speaking is right about we want to keep people alive, but at what point do we draw the line and say, hey, you've overdosed 15 or 20 times. You now have hypoxia and brain damage. We can't just leave you here in a tent or leave you here in a hotel room to continue to use drugs. You're going to die. And, many harm reductionists that I deal with in San Francisco will say, well, that's that person's choice, so we need to give them that body autonomy. Well, you know what? We spend $400 million a year just in San Francisco on rent subsidies for permanent supportive housing. I don't think it's just their choice. So you really have to consider the policy part of it. And that's something that maybe we don't talk about enough, that we should be talking about more. But it also, I wanted to share that with you so you know how far we have to go in California to actually change the narrative. And the reason why it's important to talk about California is that California is the most populous state in the nation. It has the world's 5th largest economy because it stands on its own. It also has 45% of the country's homeless population. And San Francisco itself has 25,000 drug users that we know of in the city. Last year, in one neighborhood, in the Tenderloin where I was homeless, SFPD seized 90 kilos of fentanyl off the street. And we estimate that was only 10% of what actually flowed through that neighborhood of fentanyl was out there. We have organized drug dealers operating in plain view in San Francisco. They estimate between 500 and 1,000 of them are operating in plain sight, selling fentanyl for as little as $5 to anyone, including kids. And some of the people selling the drugs are kids themselves. So you have to understand how damaging all of this is to a city like San Francisco and how damaging it can be to your community as well. Because it's not just San Francisco, it's happening in LA, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Denver. I was in Denver a couple of years ago, and what's happened between then and now is shocking. It's shocking. Salt Lake City, there's a whole network of drug dealers that come up, mostly from Honduras, and they're funneled through by the cartel, and they sell drugs, and they rotate amongst all those cities every 6 months. It's a whole network. Selling illicit fentanyl on our street. It's killing our not just people that are experiencing homelessness or marginalized folks, but they're killing our kids, killing young people. You can buy fentanyl on Snapchat right now. I can go on Snapchat right now and I can have fentanyl here within an hour. I promise you I can. It's that easy. That has to change. So, we've taken we've changed the narrative in San Francisco to something more pragmatic. The new mayor has just passed a fentanyl state of emergency ordinance, which I helped support get passed. It's going to stand up 1,500 shelter beds. It's going to open a couple of stabilization centers, including one drug-free stabilization center. We've changed recovery. We've made recovery now front and center on the West Coast as the primary solution to stem the overdose crisis and reduce homelessness. And that doesn't mean the battle is over. What that means is that we changed the political narrative in a city like San Francisco from one that was just focused on harm reduction, decriminalization. There was some talk about safe supply. We tried a safe injection site a couple of years ago, which was an unmitigated disaster. If you want data on that, I have it. I'll tell you all about it. To one now where we're taking an approach that focuses on accountability, getting people that are struggling with addiction off the street, not necessarily putting them in jail, but taking them to a stabilization center where they can be triaged and then put on medication-assisted treatment to help them kick fentanyl. And then if the behaviors continue, then the accountability becomes more and more and more, as it should be. Just as addiction is a progressive disease, the behaviors that you exhibit in addiction as your disease progress also become more progressive, which elicits a response. And that response sometimes has to be from law enforcement. But if we can avoid that and take someone somewhere to get help, we can at least convince some of them that this is the path forward. Otherwise, they're going to die. And we're already seeing that, the data backs that up. Since 2019, over 4,000 people have died in San Francisco of drug overdose. 4,000. We're actually outpacing everyone else per capita in the country. We're trading places with Philadelphia. We go back and forth between who's number one. Because Philadelphia and Kensington, they're having big issues over there as well. There's been a tacit admission in San Francisco that harm reduction is a tool, not policy, and I want to highlight that by saying that 2 weeks ago, the Department of Public Health sponsored an overdose prevention summit that looks very familiar to the Recovery Summit. In fact, they hosted it in the same building, in the same theater, and they even had signs up that said recovery is possible and everything. And then they had this panel of folks that came up and sat there, and one of the guys, his name is Maurice Bird, he runs the Harm Reduction Foundation in Oakland, who gets contracts from the Department of Public Health, sat there, plain view of everybody, and said, I think fentanyl should be legalized. Our public health department gives him money so that he can say fentanyl should be legalized. That's the current narrative from our public health, okay? So, maybe not in your state, but in Washington, Oregon, California, that's the narrative. Colorado, that's the narrative. So we have a lot of work to do. So while I agree, things like marijuana are gateway drugs, absolutely. We need to focus on changing the narrative in the policy world around harm reduction and the role that it plays in making our drug policy, because if we don't, they're going to win. And it's not like a win-lose thing, but at the same time, what would happen if we legalized fentanyl and we started just giving out fentanyl patches to anyone who wanted it? There's already 20 to 40, I think it's 40 million now, 10% of the United States is addicted to drugs right now, plus another 11% addicted to alcohol that has alcoholism, right? How many more people do you think would get addicted to fentanyl patches if you could walk into a dispensary, like a pot dispensary, and pick up, I'm just going to pick up some patches for the weekend? How many more people do you think are going to get addicted to opioids and overdose and die? And people say, oh no, it'll keep them safe. That's not true. I got addicted to a pristine, safe supply, 10 milligram roxicodone after I had surgery via prescription. I didn't get addicted to heroin, and that came later. that got addicted to those substances in the 90s. Except mine happened in 2015, so it wasn't even that long ago. It wasn't until 2017 that I started on heroin, because I couldn't get the pills anymore. And then by 2018, fentanyl had already hit the street and I started smoking. So, the whole idea about safe supply is flawed because addiction, it's about addiction, folks. And opioids is extremely addictive. It's one of the most addictive drugs, if not the most addictive drug out there. It doesn't matter if it's Dilaudid, or Oxycontin, or fentanyl, or heroin. It's addictive. And once you get addicted, that takes over your survival instincts in your brain. It takes over you can't make, every decision that you make basically has to have an end result of you getting more drugs. At least that was my experience in addiction. And it wasn't until I stopped and found recovery. And that doesn't mean just stopping to use drugs. That means finding a new set of principles in which to live my life by that I was able to change and get back with my family. And now I'm back with my wife and kids. Yeah. So, there's a new mayor in San Francisco, there's a new mayor in Portland, there's a new administration in Washington, D.C. I'm hopeful that rational, evidence-based solutions to drugs and homelessness are promoted over radicalized interpretations of harm reduction. We need to continue to work on a development of a continuum of care that includes a combination of accountability, harm reduction, and recovery. It can't just be one. You know, you hear about the four-pillar approach, and you hear harm reductionists talk about the four-pillar approach. The problem is they didn't want the fourth pillar, which is enforcement. So sitting on a three-legged stool isn't so easy, is it? Yeah. So if we're going to do it, we have to really be about it. And one of the other stools is recovery, too. And the way people talk about recovery nowadays, they downplay. They almost treat like recovery as if it's a bonus that happens by accident. No. It should be the number one thing that people focus on when it comes to drug policy. Because you know why? Recovery is the ultimate form of harm reduction. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.